Today, the committee will be voting on intro bill number 1281A, which will prohibit retail establishments from refusing to accept payment in cash. As a co-sponsor of this bill, I'm happy that we can draw attention to some of the unintended consequences of new cashless technologies and how they impact marginalized populations. Cashless transactions can be beneficial for businesses. Eliminating cash from the premises removes the incentive for robbery, and store owners don't have to worry about having change for customer transactions or making deposits at day's end. Businesses also report that card transactions happen faster. That means less wait times for customers who appreciate speed and efficiency. However, there are also unintended negative consequences that flow on from a policy that relies exclusively on cashless payments. In a modern financial hub like New York City, it might be easy to assume that everyone has easy access to the banking facilities and technology that allow cashless transactions. Unfortunately, however, this is not the case. Across the city, there are large populations who are disconnected from formal banking institutions. In 2013, close to 12% of the city's population were completely unbanked. Additionally, more than 25% of the population were underbanked, meaning that they relied on services such as payday loans or check cashing facilities rather than banks. The share of unbanked and underbanked households is also closely linked to poverty rates. According to a 2015 report, the boroughs with the highest percentages of unbanked and underbanked households were the Bronx and Brooklyn. Both of these boroughs had rates way above the national, state, and city rates, and both also have high levels of poverty. In terms of neighborhoods, in Brownsville, which falls partly in my district, 28% of households had no bank account in 2015. Both populations face specific challenges when opening bank accounts, whether that be a lack of documents or identifying information, language barriers, or safety fears. Cashless technology clearly brings important benefits to businesses and to the customers who are able to make use of it. And while it can seem counterintuitive to challenge innovations that streamline processes and make businesses more efficient, it is important to ensure that these changes do not cause unintended harm. When attitudes toward cash money equated with being dirty, antiquated, or unsophisticated, we risk stigmatizing the communities who rely on it. We want to make sure that the people who have no other form of legal tender can fully make use of it. If not, we risk segregating customers and perpetuating the divide between the haves and have-nots.
I'd like to welcome you to our vote on a package of 5 bills that are designed to improve the environment for small businesses in our city. Thank you for making the time for us today. Mom and pop shops must frequently navigate an arcane maze of thousands of rules and regulations, specifically almost 6,000 rules and regulations, as they set up their businesses and keep their doors open. Without strong transparency about these regulations, smaller micro businesses can face difficulties in complying with the city laws. That's why I sponsored Intro 1467, which would create an interactive website that would provide businesses with information about applicable laws. It is absolutely vital that small businesses can access and understand local regulations, as this will enable businesses to succeed. To be quite frank, if it's not available for them in an easy-to-read and follow-up format, it's going to be very difficult for our small businesses to comply with the city's rules and regulations. It's not that they don't want to comply, it's that they don't know. And basically, the way most of our small businesses find out about rules and regulations are through violations, through a gotcha scenario, and that's not right.
These businesses are an economic multiplier, recircling a high percentage of their revenues within our local economy, creating even more growth. Small businesses are key to the ability to start a new life and eventually enter the middle class. But these opportunities are under threat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak and ask for support on Intro 1049A. The challenges facing small business owners in New York City are well known. Rising commercial rents and taxes, competition from corporate franchises, and the growth of online shopping have forced an alarming number of mom and pop stores to close their doors.
William Martin, Committee Clerk, roll call vote, Committee on Small Business. All items are coupled. Chair Jonai.
Aye on all.
Drum.
Aye on all.
Rosenthal.
I don't know.
Perkins.
Aye on all.
By a vote of 4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions, all items have been adopted by the committee.
We are now adjourned.
I am Councilmember Steve Levin, Chair of the Council's Committee on General Welfare, and today we are holding a vote on Resolution Number 740, calling on the New York City Administration for Children's Services to implement a policy finding that a person's mere possession or use of marijuana does not by itself create an imminent risk of harm to a child, warranting the child's removal. A child welfare investigation is a huge invasion of privacy and can be a threat to dignity when ACS workers are calling and visiting your child's school, teachers, friends, the super in your building, and neighbors just because you tested positive to marijuana use. We need to ensure that ACS is not wasting its time on bogus reports and that families are not being subject to unnecessary investigations and pressured into unneeded services to prove that they are worthy enough to keep their children. Current state law is very clear that substance use alone is not cause for indicating a neglect case, and that a child's physical, mental, or emotional condition must also be impaired or in imminent danger of becoming impaired due to a parent or guardian's failure to provide minimum care due to the, quote, misusing of a drug. We need more clarity on this issue with or without legalization. Vague directives lead to wide discretion, and this discretion leads to discrimination. We cannot allow for this to continue. Thus, today we are voting on Resolution 740 to call on ACS to make a formal policy change. We must ensure that a person's mere possession or use of marijuana is not used as a justification for a child's removal.
Where we know nonetheless that there are too high a number of arrests that are in some ways out of our control, or allegations that happen anyway, where those are dramatically racially disproportionate and discriminatory, and where there's still concern that in some cases children are being removed from their parents solely as the result of an allegation of marijuana possession or use, that it's pretty straightforward, that it's time for ACS simply to adopt a simple policy as outlined in this resolution. Something that I wish we had done a long time ago.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councilmember Robert Cornegy, Chair of the Committee on Housing and Buildings. The third-party transfer program established by local law in 1996 was created in an effort to remedy the widespread problem of landlords abandoning distressed properties. The goal of the third-party transfer is to target the absolute worst properties and to restore them to well-managed, financially sound buildings.
In the post-war era, when the federal government began subsidizing homeownership on a mass scale, communities of color were left behind.
I'm going to take this opportunity to hear directly and get some remarks from Public Advocate Jamani Williams.
No family in New York should have to endure this, and no family should have their home ownership taken away. I urge the committees and the council to hold HPD and others accountable to their mandate to preserving quality affordable housing for every New Yorker, especially including those who need it the most.
My name is Louise Carroll, and I'm the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, better known as HPD. I'm joined by our Deputy Commissioner for Asset and Property Management, Anne Marie Hendrickson, our Associate Commissioner for Preservation, Kim Darga, and Assistant Commissioner for Property Disposition and Finance, Lisa Tama. So I can tell you categorically, we are not looking at racial data when we are choosing these properties. We are simply looking at the properties that are on the 90-day tax lien sale list and trying to pick the ones, not the ones that owe $1,000, as the statute says. We're picking the ones that owe the most. And when we do that, we are forced by the statute to also pick up other properties around them that meet the minimum criteria.
The city does not compensate homeowners whose properties are foreclosed upon as a part of TPT in any way, correct?
When the city forecloses for the lack of payment of taxes, no property owner is compensated. The lien is sold.
Okay, so in other words, the homeowners lose all equity in their property upon foreclosure, right?
All properties foreclosed by the city that owe taxes, the foreclosure process is that the lien is sold, and if the lien isn't paid, all property owners lose their property.
Okay.
Thousands of families in my district are affected every single day because HPD, we understand you are trying to bring a program about preservation, but for many of us, it is too little too late.
Today, the committee will be voting on 4 pieces of legislation related to parking regulations, cycling, and sidewalk per harbors. The first bill proposed intro 84-A is sponsored by Councilmember Dodge, Woodbrain, much needed transparency to the parking regulations around city schools, especially during the summer months. The second bill, proposed intro 570-A, sponsored by Councilmember Mark Traeger, will help frustrated New Yorkers who get ticketed for parking on streets that have illegal parking signs. The bill will create the affirmative defense for parking violations issued to motorists who inadvertently park their cars in a spot with illegal parking signs, as long as there are no other legible signs that apply to the parking space on the same block. The third bill, proposed intro A86-A, sponsored by Councilmember Rafael Espinar, will establish a pilot program in Brooklyn for the installation of pet harbors on sidewalks adjacent. Finally, proposed intro 1457-A, sponsored by Councilmember Carlos Menchaca, will establish that cyclists crossing an intersection must follow pedestrian control signals, except where prohibited by traffic control device and as long as the cyclist yields to pedestrians in the crosswalk.
This legislation holds DOT accountable for replacing signage that is illegible and allows residents an option to contest a ticket by displaying with a photo that the sign is indecipherable. DOT must maintain its infrastructure in making sure parking signage is available and clear.
My colleague just mentioned in his statement, he was talking about safety, and certainly that is paramount to the council's concern in any legislation that we do.
Councilmember Levin and I to hold a hearing very soon on the fair fare, and we definitely would like to expand fair fare also to include to city bike to make it affordable, because what the previous study has said is true. Most Black and Latino has now been included.
By a vote of 10 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 1 abstention, all items have been adopted on today's agenda.
Today we'll be hearing and voting on an important resolution, resolution number 897, calling on Congress to pass and the President to sign the Never Forget Zadroga, Pfeiffer, Alvarez Permanent Authorization of September 11 Victim Compensation Fund, which will fully fund and finance the Victim Compensation Fund and make it permanent. This legislation has the full support of myself, and I am proud to sponsor it along with my colleague Margaret Chin. The plain and simple reason that we are here today is because the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund is rapidly running out of money. Nearly $5 billion in benefits have been awarded out of the $7.3 million fund. Absent any new funding, the General Master of the fund earlier this year said that the existing claims that were submitted by February of this year will be paid at the rate of 50% of their value. New claims filed after February will be paid at only 30% of their value. In response to this crisis, 9/11 advocates and members of Congress band together to take action and work together on proposed legislation to remedy this situation. The number of newly diagnosed illnesses among 9/11 victims is dramatically increased year after year, and the number of people who have died from 9/11 health conditions will soon surpass the number of actual people killed during the 9/11. The federal legislation is desperately needed to ensure that those who are promised and those that they will be taken care of and their family are compensated and that they have the necessary peace of mind.
Council Resolution 897 calls on our nation's leader to permanently authorize the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. There are roughly 90,000 survivors and first responders who are eligible for this fund. I urge the committee to vote yes on Resolution 897 and urge Congress to pass Senator Kristen Gillibrand and Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney's Never Forget the Heroes Act to permanently authorize the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund through 2092.
This hearing is now adjourned.
The meeting is going to start now. Good morning, I'm Councilmember Peter Koo, and I'm pleased to chair the Committee on Parks and Recreation. Today, the committee will be voting on a pre-considered bill that will ceremonially codename 86 thoroughfares and public places throughout the city. This is our semi-annual bill where we seek to honor the individuals and organizations that have made lasting contributions to the people of our city. I'm proud to support this bill, and I urge my colleagues on the committee to vote in favor of this legislation. Thank you. So before we vote, any members want to make any comments or statements? Seeing none, any public want to make any comments or statements? Can you state your name first?
Alice Blank.
Okay.
And I'm a member of Community Board 1. We all appreciate the vitally important role of the police in our community and the fallen officer, Sergeant McNaughton, whose life was tragically lost in the valorous service in Iraq. Sergeant McNaughton has been honored with a bronze plaque in the Canal Street subway with his name entered on the police memorial in the Battery and honored with namings in several areas in hometowns in Long Island.
I just want to say we're voting on William Scribner Way, and I knew Bill personally. He was an incredibly talented individual. I vividly remember taking my daughter to see him conduct Peter and the Wolf concert at the New York Botanical Garden. He will be sorely missed, and I'm really very proud that we're able to do this today. And with that, I vote aye.
Yeah.
I am really, really pleased today to have the inclusion of this package of street co-namings in the memory of Herbert Lewis Huntley Sr., who was a stellar hero in the Jamaica area. And I'm very, very proud of his service to his community. Among many other things, he happened to be the very first African-American manager of Dan Supreme Supermarket. And I proudly vote aye on all.
Thank you.
By a vote of 8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions, item has been adopted by the committee.
Good morning. My name's Steve Matteo. I'm the chair of the Committee on Standards and Ethics. Today we'll be holding a second hearing and vote on proposed intro 1272A, whose primary sponsors are Council members Barry Grudenchik and Mark Levine, in relation to amending the reporting and donor disclosure requirements for organizations affiliated with elected officials. This bill was previously heard by the committee on December 3rd, 2018. As was discussed at our prior hearing, the council passed a law last session establishing reporting requirements on donations for all organizations affiliated with elected officials. It also required that any organization that spends more than 10% of its expenditures on elected official communications is subject to a restriction on the donations it can receive from persons doing business with the city. While the basic structure of that law has so far seemed to be well balanced, we took testimony at our last hearing from unrestricted organizations about the administrative burdens that complying has created for them. These are organizations that are not involved in elected official communications, but who are still subject to the law's reporting requirements. Proposed Intro 1272A would address those concerns by creating separate reporting requirements for restricted and unrestricted organizations. Restricted organizations would continue with current reporting requirements as they are under the existing law, with a few clarifications to strengthen those requirements. Unrestricted organizations will be required to report on all donations from a single contributor that were in aggregate in the prior year above $5,000, a dollar threshold first adopted by the Conflicts of Interest Board pursuant to an advisory opinion. Provisions would also be made for the reporting of anonymous donations. The bill would also require that the information in these reports be posted to the Conflicts of Interest Board's website in a machine-readable format. Proposed Intro 1272A would be deemed to have been retroactively in effect as of January 1st, 2019. And at this point, we're going to ask Billy Martin to call the roll.
William Martin, Committee Clerk, roll call vote, Committee on Standards and Ethics, Introduction 1272A, Chair Matteo.
Aye.
Gibson. Chin.
Aye.
Kozlowitz. By a vote of 4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions, item is adopted by the committee.
We will now go on to the adoption of minutes by Councilmember Antonio Reynoso.
Motion to adopt the minutes?
Thank you. Messages and papers from the mayor.
Excuse me, M176, withdrawing Jeffrey Roth for appointment to the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission.
Received, ordered, printed, and filed. Communication from city, county, and borough offices.
None.
Petitions and communications.
None.
Land use call-ups.
M177, Franklin Guest House.
coupled on a call-up vote, and at this time, I'd ask for a roll call vote on today's land use call-up calendar. This is just on the land use call-up calendar.
Thank you. Today's land use call-ups are adopted by a vote of 44 in the affirmative, 0 negative. We'll now have communication from Speaker Corey Johnson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Majority Leader, and welcome back to. We acknowledge the 5-year anniversary of Eric Garner's death, and I want to say in solidarity, I can't breathe, that our system has failed his family time and time again. Last week we learned that the Department of Justice decided not to file charges against Officer Daniel Pantaleo, and this was another slap in the face to his mother, Gwen Carr, and to his entire family. They have been denied justice consistently for the past 5 years, and simply put, those responsible for the death of Eric Garner must be held accountable and must be held accountable immediately. I'd also like to acknowledge the anniversary of the tragic loss of Councilmember James Davis. He was assassinated in this chamber 16 years ago to the day today. And we often think of Councilmember Davis when we walk into the members' lounge downstairs, where there is a plaque that speaks about his public service towards the city of New York as a police officer, as a council member, as a community leader, as an activist. And today, hopefully, the United States Senate will be voting on reauthorizing the September 11th Victims' Compensation Fund. And today, this City Council is voting on a resolution calling on Congress to act and to permanently authorize the funds for survivors and for their families. It is cruel, it is deeply cruel to make people who are sick from 9/11 related illnesses to beg every couple of years. It re-traumatizes them and their families. Do the right thing. Permanently authorize the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, and do it today. And lastly, there's one that's personal to us. Selena Glenn, who worked at the New York City Council for 31 years. Now I ask that we all rise and take a moment of silence to honor every single person that I mentioned. Thank you.
We will now go on to report of special committees.
None.
Reports of standing committees.
Report of the Committee on Consumer Affairs and Business Licensing, Intro 1281A.
Amended and laid over.
Report of the Committee on Finance, Preconsidered Reso 998, Transparency Resolution.
Coupled in general orders.
Preconsidered LU 472 and Reso 1006 through Preconsidered LU 476 and Reso 1010, Tax Exemptions.
Coupled in general orders.
Report of the Committee on Land Use, LU 464 and Reso 1011 and LU 465 and Reso 1012, Casena Center.
Coupled to be filed pursuant to a letter of withdrawal.
LU 466 West 18th Street Garage.
Approved with modifications and referred to the City Planning Commission pursuant to Section 197D of the New York City Charter.
LU 467 and Reso 1013 through LU 470 and Reso 1016, zoning amendments and property disposition.
Coupled in general orders.
Report of the Committee on Parks and Recreation, preconsidered intro 1631, naming of 86 thoroughfares in public places.
Coupled in general orders.
Report of the Committee on Small Business, intro 1000B through intro 1472, vacant storefronts and small business services.
Amended and coupled in general orders.
Report of the Committee on Standards and Ethics, intro 1272A, reporting requirements.
Amended and coupled in general orders.
Report of the Committee on Transportation, intro 84A and 570A, parking regulations.
Amended and coupled in general orders.
Intro 886A, pet harbors.
Amended and coupled in general orders.
Intro 1457A, pedestrian control signals.
Amended and coupled in general orders.
On the general order calendar, resolution appointing various persons, Commissioner of Deeds.
Coupled in general orders, and at this time, I'd ask for a roll call vote on all of the items on today's general order calendar.
All items on today's general order calendar are adopted by a vote of 47 in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 0 abstentions, with the exception of Intro 1457A, which was adopted by a vote of 37 affirmative, 7 negative, and 3 abstentions, and Intro 1472B, which was adopted by a vote of 45 in the affirmative, 2 negative, and 0 abstentions. Intro 570A, which was adopted by a vote of 46 in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 1 abstention. And Intro 1631, which was adopted by a vote of 46 in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 1 abstention. The revised land use call-up vote is 47 in the affirmative and 0 negative. I will now read today's resolutions into the record. Members who wish to vote against or abstain on any of these resolutions should register their vote with the clerk at the dais. I'll begin with Resolution 740. Resolution calling upon the New York City Administration for Children's Services to implement a policy finding that a person's mere possession or use of marijuana does not by itself create an imminent risk of harm to a child, warranting the child's removal. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Resolution 746, resolution calling on the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign legislation requiring the New York State Department of Health to create clear and fair regulations for hospitals on drug testing those who are pregnant or giving birth, including informing patients of their rights before any discussion of drug use or drug testing. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Resolution 897A, an amended resolution calling on Congress to pass and the President to sign the Never Forget the Heroes, the James Adroga, Ray Pfeiffer, and Luis Alvarez Permanent Authorization of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund Act, H.R. 1327 S546, which would fully finance and extend authorization for the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund until fiscal year 2092. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it, and I certainly applaud Speaker Corey Johnson for his continuous voice and making sure that this is something that continues to be a part of the national conversation and debate, and we have seen success today. Thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you, and I just want to close by also recognizing my interns as well. Councilmember Rose.
Thank you, Madam
Yes.
Majority Leader. I wanted to say that I just found out that I want to thank Carlos Menchaca and all of the Transportation Committee members who are trying to make pedestrian and bicyclists safer. I just found out that a 17-year-old there was a crash in my district, and a 17-year-old bicycle rider just died. I also wanted to acknowledge a happy occasion. My communications director is celebrating his birthday, and I wanted to say happy birthday, Vincent Gragnani. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and happy birthday. Councilmember Chin.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about Intro 1633, a bill focused on relocating tenants displaced by a vacay order, an issue that I have been working on closely in my district. Far too often, tenants who have experienced the trauma of evacuating their homes due to their landlord's negligence also have to deal with the additional burden of being temporarily placed in a neighborhood away from their families, schools, hospital, and all kinds of services. My bill will require HPD to provide temporary housing for tenants in their community district or immediately adjacent community district. Our city needs to take all measures necessary to minimize disruption to tenants displaced by a vacay order. This is one way we can break the cycle that forces too many tenants into shelter system, and I urge all my colleagues to join me on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chin. Thank you so much, Councilmember Levin. Speaker Corey Johnson.
Madam Majority Leader, the stated meeting of July 23rd, 2019 is hereby adjourned.
All right, so thank you, everyone, and we're here, as I believe, to look at the proposed resolution that is dated the 23rd of July.
As the securing of funding for a flyover bridge at the pinch point and preparations for its construction. No, it's not in the resolution. I'll read it. Are now guaranteed the protraction of its schedule, which isn't set to begin until the other parts of the ESCR are in place, is an unnecessary disruption to the use of the waterfront, and we expect the ESCR revisit the staging plan and look at ways to begin the flyover bridge construction contemporaneously with its north and south improvements. So that's been funded, and we'd like to see that within your resolution as well. Thank you.
So it's the Manhattan Borough Board resolution in front of you with the one change proposed by CB6, and that would be to add on page 7 in the therefore be it further resolved list of bullets, the bullet, as the securing of funding for a flyover bridge at the pinch point and preparation for its construction are now guaranteed, the protraction of its schedule, which isn't to begin until the other parts of the ESCR are in place, is an unnecessary disruption to the use of the waterfront, and we expect the ESCR to revisit the staging plan and look at ways to begin the flyover bridge construction contemporaneously with its north and south improvements. So that will be added into the final version sent over, and with that, we can call the vote.
We have 10 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions. The vote passes.
Thank you, everyone.
This meeting has now ended.